gas left in the tank for Fuel. Their first win in over 300 days occurred this last weekend.
And there were also some match chat shenanigans between two California teams, leading to some hefty fines, and the circle of suck in the Chinese region has finally been broken.
I'm Avast, this is Jayne, and welcome to Contested. What's up, guys? We are back once again, not in the Frontier Communication Studio in Dallas, Texas. We are in Dallas, Texas, but not in the Frontier Communication Studio. I'm Avast, and obviously with Jayne here once again. How are you, Jayne, after our little break?
I'm doing pretty well. Great games this weekend, but there was a comment in chat the other day that we've got our green screen set up, but we're not actually green screening onto anything. So why don't we just green screen ourselves into the studio and pretend like we're there? It'll basically be the same thing.
That's genius. That's genius. What if we take a picture of our background green screens and then green screen our background with the green screen? So we're green screening ourselves onto the background that still has the green screen. I've been doing that a lot of my own streams where I just like took a picture of the Envy offices.
Oh yeah.
And I put my screen as the background as the Envy offices.
I actually tuned into your stream one time. I was like, how the hell is he at the office? I was like,
yeah. I love doing stuff like that.
You got me. But you know who else is not at the office? The Dallas Fuel. They're playing from home. So no practice facility, and just like everyone else under these shelter-in-place orders, they're playing from home on their own setups. But it was a doubleheader this weekend for the Dallas Fuel. First, they went against the Los Angeles Gladiators. They lost. Not overly surprising. And then was the fun one. They went against the Los Angeles Valiant and had a little bit of a comeback, winning against the Los Angeles Valiant in 5 games and breaking, as you said, that over 300-day win streak, loss streak.
If only a win streak, perhaps for the Fuel, but not quite. No, it was definitely looking grim. Since they hadn't won since stage 3, first week stage 3 of season 2, and so it'd been a long time. Not quite Shanghai level, but definitely was getting up there. And it was a good game versus Valiant as well. It was a good game, good win.
And just the stat about the 300 days is kind of a meme considering they didn't play for almost 200 of those.
Yes. Yeah.
So just between the off season and then all the absolute shenanigans that happened during the start of the season, you can always make statistics tell whatever kind of story you want, and the 300-day loss streak is certainly one story. I'm sure people were upset that they didn't make it to the full year long. Even the Shanghai Dragons in their first season didn't make it a full year without a loss, did they? Or without a win, did they?
No, they went. I thought they ended up. I think it was like 400 something days without a win. Actually,
goodness.
So technically, but also you have to remember that does include off season, right? So
Yes.
It does not include it's not like over a year of them playing games and losing for that. Like it does include some off time. So it is not quite the same.
We need some standard metric to figure out just how bad these statistics have to be. But they did get the win against the Valiant. We had the bet with the one member of chat. I don't even remember his name anymore. He thought that the Fuel were going to win against the Gladiators and lose against the Valiant, and we thought that was such a ridiculous suggestion that we wagered hosting this show on it. So fortunately, we're the smart ones still, supposedly.
Not a chance. The house always wins. The house always wins, commenters, okay?
Yeah. I mean, the Overwatch League is scripted. You can't compete against somebody who actually has access to that script. Our predictions, flawless. So here we are back hosting another show.
The other commenter as well, Brandon, as well last week was, Fuel will get rolled by both LA teams. Let's be real. Well, Brandon, incorrect, okay? Pit boss Nate Nanzer, because that's what he didn't go to the Epic, okay?
No,
Nate Nanzer got hired as a pit boss for the Overwatch League casino, and he walks around making sure that the house always wins, and the house won, okay? Fuel did win again against a lot of people's judgments. Not ours, though.
Yeah, and then after the games, I like to read the Reddit threads. I don't know why. I'm a sucker for punishment, I guess. But, reading the Valiant and the Fuel match thread just reminded me that, all the threads, when you read a match thread between, the Shanghai Dragons and the Chengdu Hunters, sometimes you have some people having some opinions. Other people are just, a little bit out to lunch. But in any Dallas Fuel match thread, it's always, people just light their hair on fire and have probably the most ridiculous opinions you could probably ask for. So
speaking of lighting their hair on fire and having maybe not ridiculous opinion, but what seemed to be a ridiculous choice in team comp was the fact that Fuel and Fuel publicly commented about this. Arrow talked about it too. Is that they played Decay Tracer the entire time, no Torb, because Torb
in a
last week
where
was very
everybody
meta.
thought it was going to be Torb meta. Yeah,
yes. And I mean, they publicly stated, for himself, publicly stated, and I tend to agree. And a lot of players are like, yeah, this makes sense. Is that the Torb was really good because you have tons of shield pressure, and the turret denies value to both the Tracer and Dooms.
Mm-hmm.
And Fuel just fearlessly played Decay Tracer, and he popped off too.
Yeah. He did. No, one of the things that he really got a lot of value on is simply the mobility of Tracer. It gives you more options and more threat. There was a lot of times where, a character would get low or try and back off or something like that, but Decay especially was always in the wings doing a lot of farming, like crazy amounts of farming. And then if anybody kind of got low and needed to retreat, they couldn't retreat because Decay was always there ready to catch him. And then there were huge pulse bombs, like absolutely massive pulse bombs consistently going on to the Reinhardt of Dreamer from Los Angeles Valiant, and them being able to actually negate that the huge healing, because this week was primarily mostly Lucio and the Moira, being actually able to burst down those tanks, even if they did play a little bit slow and didn't really get much done, in the kind of brawly in the center like you saw most of these teams playing when they were playing things like Reaper Torbjorn. I think the Tracer playstyle really worked out and does kind of signal to me more or less how the Dallas Fuel have more or less been operating. They seem to kind of have two different teams. It's kind of like Doha and Decay, whose job is to murder everyone, and then their other four members of the team, depending on who it is at the time, just their job is to get murdered as slowly as possible. We don't see a lot of plays usually coming out from the kind of the core of the team. Gamsu, however, in this series had some ridiculous shatters, and probably Gamsu's one of the reasons that they did win, especially with that shatter to close out Eichenwald. But so far, kind of the tank line and the support line hasn't been super impressive to me. But Doha and Decay, both of them, Doha especially, we talk about Decay because the focus was on him. Even the casters were harping on him during the first, like the early part of the.
I was harping on him. I mean, he was pretty good,
Yeah,
he was pretty good.
A lot of people criticizing the pick, but Doha and Decay, just both of them absolutely went beast mode. You saw some incredible finishes on maps like, again, Eichenwald, and then the Oasis University finish where they were down by 3, and then Doha and Decay just clutched and killed everyone. Like, insane plays. And like we said last week, when we actually had our show predicting this, we said that this match was going to be close, just barely favoring the Fuel, and I think that we couldn't have been more accurate about that. It was really close to going to the Los Angeles Valiant, just 1 or 2 fights, and to be fair, it's been as close as a singular nano boost being the reason why Dallas Fuel has lost matches in the past. So, I'm not going to say that they're lucky, because they've been unlucky probably more times than they have been their counter. But yeah, what did you think about the match?
I mean, overall, and I've had this opinion as well, is that it's never good to have a team that's really bad in a league, right? Like, you never want to actually, like, it's funny for a bit. Like, it's really funny. Like, every time you go into the Boston matches or before the Shanghai matches, season 1, you're like, ha, they're so bad, guys. Like, this, I can't wait for this matchup. Yeah. But then it eventually, especially if the league's parity is increased, which I'd argue it has, particularly this season, the overall parity of the league has gotten better and better and better season to season generally. Especially with now that there is no metas that teams just sort of stomp on in particular, like, how GOATS was for season 2. And if you have one team that's exceptionally bad, then it starts getting close to, as Sideshow coined the term, entertainment thieves, where it's not fun to watch anymore, and it's kind of sad, and it's not healthy for the ecosystem or for the players or for the org, right, to have a position that's that bad. So I was happy that Fuel have finally won, and that they're starting to look better, and they're having some parity there, because even though, and it's been tough to be a defender of them and say, like, well, not defenders, like, I'm not over here saying like, oh yeah, they're gonna do great, but as in, like, no, they're not garbage, because like they just haven't played a lot. They haven't had a chance to play, and showing now that they even play in a suboptimal comp in terms of like the actual what is considered very meta and the counters available in terms of the heroes with Torb countering Tracer. Even playing that, they beat the Valiant, who have looked pretty successful and being Shock. So I think that overall the game was a good sign that we're heading into a league that is, for all intents and purposes, looking much more equal across the board, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And one of the weird things, I was actually taking a look at the standings. I don't think that Fuel is the point where it's kind of like they're so bad they're funny, like the Houston Outlaws and the Boston Uprising. Maybe those teams are the ones you're talking about being entertainment thieves, more or less. Kind of, you go.
See, even Houston have won some games though, so it really just sits with Boston right now. It's Boston. With Boston. That's really the culprit.
But right now in the standings, the Dallas Fuel are sitting at 17th out of 20, of course, and the Los Angeles Valiant are sitting at 14th. Even the San Francisco Shock are in the bottom half, which is kind of like a weird thing to see. The Valiant certainly don't seem to me to be such a bad team that they belong in 14th.
But part of that is definitely games played, right? Because we have like New York sitting at like 6 games played or whatever, and Rain have played like a lot of them as well.
There's a huge discrepancy. There's still some teams that have played 2 games. There's other teams like that have played 8, which I think is Boston, which was again, thank God we had so many Boston games. But excuse me.
You good over there? Oh, he needs to cough. Well, the thought of Boston just triggering a response there, and he's like,
There's your gag reflex.
He just loses his stuff right there. But it is like, obviously, the lack of games have definitely. It's not really indicative of where Shock or Valiant and a lot of teams really are standing. You know, because
Yes.
I mean, Titans are finally going to. They still have only played two games, and they're finally going to play their third game this weekend. So it's
I mean, that's actually the story of both of the top teams. Like, technically, according to the standings and how they calculate it mathematically, you have the Seoul Dynasty ranking first with 2 games won, no games lost, +6 map differential. And then second place, you do have the Vancouver Titans with the same map record, but only a 4 map differential. So yeah, both of the teams in first and second, according to the official standings right now, have 2 wins, 0 losses, and then the entire rest of the thing is just an absolute cluster. But yeah, we'll, these things will kind of spread out. I don't really have much faith for the teams that are at the bottom of the standings with kind of the 6 games played, the 8 games played. But the teams that have 2 to 4 games played right now, they're the ones who can really move around the standing, because every single win and loss changes their win percentage really, really quite dramatically.
And I have to bring up the question too, Jayne, sort of from a coaching perspective, someone that's been there, is that so for the Fuel, it seems pretty apparent to me at least that, and by the comments of Arrow and such, that they are playing stylistically something like hero comps and heroes that they feel very comfortable with. Like, they didn't put Decay on Torb because they felt that his Tracer is way better and that his Torb wouldn't be nearly as impactful, and they could just do much more with Decay and Tracer, even if it's not optimal. Do you think, because it always goes back to that same old, like, okay, do you play what's meta or do you play what you're best at? Do you think that is a strategy now that we're seeing Fuel do it and other teams even potentially do that? Is that really how teams should continue to move forward with, and especially the Fuel of like, just commit to playing what you're best at, or should there be some adjustments made for the meta?
I mean, that's really the $1 million question. Should you play what you're best at? Should you adapt to the meta? What's going to be strongest? You definitely have some conflicting styles even coming throughout. You have the Los Angeles Gladiators, who have been shown to be very comfortable adapting to maps, to compositions, to opponent counters. People are happy to play seemingly anything to win and looking pretty good on it. And then you have groups like the Shanghai Dragons, which we'll talk a little bit later, which seem to pick one composition for the week, play it really well, and be able to play it in multiple different ways. And one of the things with the Dallas Fuel is that they have the kind of they want to play something that they can really iron out kind of all the kinks in, make sure that it's really nicely played, to the book sort of thing, and gives them a little bit of advantage. I think it's almost a little bit too safe and too by the book. They've got everything that works out on paper, but especially if they're going against off the book things, the large coaching staff of Dallas Fuel and other teams, does tend to kind of cage people in, cage their thinkings. Like, if they haven't prepared for a specific scenario or environment or situation or anything like that, they may not be able to adapt as fly, because if you have so many game plans and something's not on the game plan, that can be like, oh, we didn't prepare for this, and you just freeze or stop.
So wait, you're saying that more staff could essentially hamstring teams than less staff?
I absolutely think that's the case. Yeah, I definitely think that people can kind of coach themselves into a corner, if that's the way to put it. You want people to feel confident, really confident in their own gameplay, not only in their own gameplay, but what everybody else is doing, right? But if they, we saw this, remember there was a very, very famous map. It was Hanamura, and then it was on Second Point, and they were talking, there was a comms segment shown, and it was back when Custa was actually on the Dallas Fuel, and they tried the same attack like over and over and over again, because they didn't have anything else prepared, and they really weren't comfortable adapting in anything with different compositions, different attack routes. They didn't have anything else in their toolkit. So if that does become kind of the environment on the team, that these are the plans, you stick to that. If one person, like a DPS player, if you had a Team Canada, which is another team I have experience with, if you have an individual like Agilities or Surefour, who really feel quite strongly about being able to adapt and their confidence in playing different heroes, they'll sometimes go on to different heroes, maybe not even inform their team. They're just going to adapt on the fly. We're a really, really well-disciplined team, one that's prepared multiple different compositions for situations. If something's not working, the chance of them adapting on the fly becomes a lot less. They're not going to go off script, because then the other 5 members of their team don't know what to do. Especially when you're getting to those 2 CP maps. So I definitely think that with the new hero pools and just in general, there is a big threat of having too much coaching and too much, almost too much preparation, especially if it's the kind of preparation where you're not teaching concepts. You're not teaching mindsets or paradigms or anything. You're teaching like you do this here, this because of this. If you're making like actual coaching game trees, especially in the hero pool meta, where not only is your game plan not really going to survive first contact with the enemy, but the chance of you accurately scouting what the opponent is going to come out you with, I think there's a real big chance that the coaching is actually a net negative on the teams if you go about it the wrong way.
Speaking of potential overcoaching as well, which now was potentially balanced back, the Shock. In addition to teams that have won, Shock, after having a very abrupt last weekend, or I guess the weekend before last weekend, technically, the games that just occurred for them, which was only one, is that they finally did win a game.
Yes.
They won another game, or not finally won another game, but they've won a game before, but won another game after a very rough showing before, and it was also against the Valiant, who they'd lost against previously, and they looked a lot better. A lot better. Their comps look far more consistent. Most importantly, we weren't just like throwing in random people on random heroes. They had a pretty set roster, and they were playing a very consistent style, which was very different than what they were doing.
Yeah, and we got to see Moth back on Lucio, and it kind of made me like the engages, the disengages from the San Francisco Shock were just so clean. In this match, you saw Striker really popping off, Choi Hoban back on that Diva instead of the Zarya Ryan, especially trying to support that Doomfist that we saw last week. Didn't really work out nearly as well. One of the big things is that we were talking about the San Francisco Shock has previously been a team, and that kind of cohesion and teamwork, being able to move as a singular unit, is one of the real big reasons that they were so powerful previously. And by previously, we mean kind of everything except for last weekend. But seeing Moth come back on that Lucio, it really made me feel like that was the missing ingredient. Kind of surprised I didn't pick up on it last week, honestly, but seeing it this week, Moth back on that Lucio, looking really comfortable, especially compared to how he was looking on the Brigida. He looked technically proficient on the Brigida, but maybe he wasn't as confident in the shot calling or being able to actually call the engages. We don't have the insider opinion on kind of what was going with the San Francisco Shock, but I think that Moth, Choi Hoban, both were absolute highlights for that series, and they changed the things that they had to in order to take the win against the Valiant. But yeah, at least for me, it was a hugely thanks to Choi Hoban and Moth. You?
Yeah, it does beg the question about where, because I've always been of the opinion, a lot of people also agree, this is that Lucio kind of carries Overwatch on its back in terms of like the speed of the game, because when Lucio's not in, you're watching Brigida Ana, or like or weird stuff like Ana Mercy, or like it's a lot slower. There's no rotation. There's not really as decisive rotations. You aren't having these push moments. You aren't using beats aggressively. There aren't like that all that counterplay and fast pacedness that you generally have with Lucio. And when you have a player like Moth, who has been very, very good at Lucio, but also arguably most people have said that he is a very, if not necessarily a main caller, but a very smart caller.
Yeah,
in terms of how they create plans, I think that maybe Shock was hurting, like you said, without having Moth on Lucio to sort of direct them, to be the nervous system to the body of the Shock.
Yeah, the San Francisco Shock has always been a proactive team, and Lucio with the speed allows you to be much more proactive. And I think, with that gone, and them being forced to at least play a little bit more neutral or even reactive when they're on the defense, you can still be a very aggressive defensive team, making sure that you're rotating and transitioning like you were talking about, but not so if you're not playing with the Lucio. If you haven't scouted it in time or perked it correctly, then maybe you're playing catch up and having to react to what the opponent's doing. That kind of pace of the game gets away from you, and the opponent gets that advantage. And it really didn't feel like the Shock liked that game style at all. Doesn't really surprise me, since we have never really seen that from them. But yeah, having that speed back, having that strong, confident Moth, Lucio, yeah, that's I'm gonna keep harping on it, but I think that was absolutely the reason.
So masculine and manly when you use like that strong, confident Moth. Well, but you're not wrong. Like it is, and I agree with you at all points. It's especially when you consider that they were so good at goats last year. It's really hard to shift your meta mentality, which are so reliant on Lucio, to come to the next year. And it's something we should keep an eye on, I think, as the season progresses. Is weeks when Lucio are not available, do Shock crumble or look not as good? Because if so, then it looks like the hypothesis is very likely correct, that they need a Lucio to function at their max efficiency, more than likely. I think that's really going to be the crux for them. And also speaking of cruxes, or I don't know, maybe not crux. I guess cusses. I guess would be a more apt term. There were some fines handed out during the weekend, some very funny fines about chat talking that we had observed during the matches, Jayne.
Yeah, there was, of course, they've changed the production standards. They unless you're Flashpoint, apparently you can't be in a studio, and everyone's under the shelter-in-place order. So even the Overwatch League production has changed, and one of the things that they did change, and apparently let the players know about, was that they would actually have match chat enabled. So for those who aren't familiar with the Overwatch Spectator client, you can just type /hide chat and make sure that any of those notifications, like friends, messages, whispers, anything, doesn't show up on the actual broadcast, which is normally what's used. However, in these recent matches, maybe try to give a little bit more of a replacement or a surrogate for the actual live audience. They had this live chat, and then Lastro pulled out the
he brought it was questionable. Questionable would be the best term to describe it, especially considering
hilarious is another way.
Hilarious is, from a viewer perspective, as someone watching the matches, it was really funny. But from a broadcast perspective, and knowing how you have to feel as a broadcast because you never know, like, if there was a sponsor watching and then they see that line on their game, I'm like, this is questionable. Like,
those messages show up in chat and then immediately it goes to a Coca-Cola commercial or something like
exactly. I think it did happen. I think something like that did happen. But the point is that obviously, fines, and the players were aware of it. Lastro himself said maybe like he'd forgotten, but all the other players in the match, as soon as the famous words come out, and then Rascal repeats it too after Lastro says it, which is a funny part. They're all just like just like banging on their keyboards trying to get it out of there. So it was something that everyone knew ahead of time and knew that it was happening, which is why it's pretty disingenuous to say like, oh, they shouldn't be fined. But it's like, well, they did break the rules and were told what was going to happen, and you can't do that for a broadcast. And like, you could argue like, well, they shouldn't have match chat enabled. And like, yeah, but also if I tell you to wear your seatbelt and you don't wear your seatbelt, even if and then I crash and you fly out the windshield, you're going to be like, well, why weren't you driving slower? And it's like, well, that's not the point here. It's like, you probably should have been wearing the seatbelt. Like,
there are two different problems. And I'm hugely in favor of actually having the chat shown. I know that there like the rumors about Jake just being extremely toxic to the enemy team during season 1. I think there was a reason that it got disabled originally. But, I think that one of the things that you're trying to build with the league is the personality, the storylines around these players, and any little bit that you get, any real reason that you have to kind of follow or like a single player. I think Lastro probably gained a lot of fans off this. It's hilarious. It's edgy.
And there have been other moments that aren't filled with, profanity or something that's not broadcast friendly that have been fantastic to watch too.
Absolutely.
Like, Striker trolling Dreamer and stuff during the Valiant game. Like, there's been really funny moments that aren't required to be censored at all.
Yeah, and if we do kind of lose out on match chat just because of the comments from Lastro and Rascal, then I think that would be really quite a loss, especially when we're in this kind of quarantine mode where things are already super scuffed. Just embrace it, get a little bit of more engagement with the players. I think it's great stuff. The comments are funny most of the time, and the players will learn to control themselves if enough fines get slapped around. So I hope that continues.
And there are different opinions, right? Because Wolf, one of the Overwatch League broadcasters, one of the casters, expressed that he doesn't like match chat, because he feels that it's not professional enough, essentially, in that vein. And you have to, and there are people that feel that way. And also, Wolf in particular comes from a very like Korean esports type of background in terms of how and Korean and the sort of the vibe for broadcast in Korea is a very different vibe. For esports is a very different vibe than it is from the West often. So it's understandable, and there are risks associated with it, and there's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to have it either, right? You don't have to have it. But on the flip side, you miss out on moments like that, even if they are going to result in a fine for players. It's really, really funny.
And counterpoint to the comments from Wolf and other professional of the league, but if you do get things too polished, they can, to some people at least, feel very soulless, kind of lifeless, very corporate, where, I wouldn't call Tyler 1 anything close to professional.
Oh, he's so polished, especially his head. His head is very polished.
But the stuff that he does when he did put on his Tyler 1's competitive series and all that, it was hugely popular. And there's a different style, and it's especially in kind of when you are seeing this sort of broadcast being what people are very accustomed to in the first place, when they're 90% of the time watching their favorite streamer and not a professional Overwatch League broadcast, which is more similar to the television. Or like television series and broadcast, like a traditional broadcast. I think that there's a large portion of the audience that would actually prefer if the broadcasts were a little bit less professional and more, I think, authentic or sincere, genuine are probably the right words to use there. Closer to how the players actually act. making them stand up and do these interviews or something like, that's something that they would never do on their own. You wouldn't find them giving answers of that variety on their own personal streams or on Twitter. Like it's a completely different mentality, different way of talking and expressing themselves. And I think that players, or at least, sorry, I think the audience really appreciates that and likes seeing it, especially in kind of what would normally be a professional setting.
Yeah, and you have to remember too that players aren't all like these aren't all a bunch of like NFL, NBA, or Premier League soccer players, that are just like true chads walking around doing whatever. Like a lot of times when you put them in these settings where they have to answer questions in front of camera, their demeanor isn't going to be quite as alpha as once they're in match chat, because the match chat comments and what the players are like naturally trash talking each other stuff is generally not happening quite as much once you get out of the game, because that's sort of where they're place they're comfortable with, and you're not having that one-on-one confrontations. And it's not implying as if all players are beta. That's definitely not the case. There are plenty of very chad players. Have you seen Baby Bay? But the point is that like obviously the interactions are going to be different in the match chat than they're going to be once the games are done or in between. Like there isn't going to be like some UFC fight weigh-ins where they're getting up in each other's faces beforehand. Like that's just not going to be happening. And so having a environment that you can get those really funny and very like confrontational moments at times in match chat is a benefit, especially during the times where we don't have the stages because of COVID and things like that. But I think the more important issue, Jayne, and one that I brought up before, or not earlier today, but I brought up in personal talking, was that when these fines are being paid to the league. When Overwatch League fines a player, the fines are paid to the league, but there's no players association to appeal or talk about how much these fines are, right? Yeah. And I wouldn't say these fines are necessarily backbreaking for Lasher or Rascal, right? Like it's $1,000, but it raises the question, right?
Yes. This is a question that I didn't realize we were going to bring this up.
I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to bring it up, right? I think it's pertinent.
I mean, Players Association has been something that's been talked about since the very start, and I think that there's been a lot of issues that have come up over the years, sometimes to do with agents, sometimes to do with fines, sometimes to do with regulations, the whole thing. There's player agents, or player association would definitely give them a voice, but I don't think the ecosystem is something that's really set up to actually support such an association, especially when we're looking at an organization, the Overwatch League as a whole. This COVID-19, the pandemic, is certainly stressful to the league. There's already, you see a whole bunch of these organizations, like we just had the Montreal Rebellion be dropped as well. A lot of teams are cutting costs, and the player association, even though they might be able to actually represent the players, go to bat for them, maybe actually go do these things to kind of negotiate on behalf of the players, whether it comes to regulations about the league, development of the game, agencies, teams handling, whatever it is, that actual support doesn't come for free. And even though it's a really kind of nice thing to dream about and talk about having, and would certainly do some good, I think the fact that the Overwatch League itself still seems fragile. It's still growing. It's still trying to prove itself. And especially with teams seemingly cutting back financially because of the way the economy is, because of the way the COVID-19 is really hurting these teams. The actual kind of faith overall in the success of the league is slowing down. And I think anything that really kind of hurts the back end business model, even if it does give marginal benefits to the players, could be, it's unlikely to happen. Even if it would provide benefits, I don't think that it actually has enough warrant or has enough merit on its own in order to become a thing. Especially the impetus out of all the potential impetus we have had over the last 2 years or so. I don't think that the straw that broke the camel's back in order to form a players union would be fines based off of Lastro saying 3 words in match.
Yeah, it's more of it is like, it just brings up that weird conflict of interest of like, one of league is able to unilaterally leverage fines, and you don't really have a way to appeal them or say what because the league would have told Lastro $10,000 fine. Like there isn't really a process. Obviously the orgs can probably complain, and there is always that method, but it's still just like not, there's no, and as someone that's actually been in season 1 where they tried to set up some of the early meetings, they brought in retired NBA lawyers from their player agencies, from the NBA Player Association. It was Morte, who was an Overwatch player and now does agency stuff, I believe.
Yeah, I forget
along with Too
agencies
Easy
he's with, but yes.
And they brought them in. They had a talk, and we were all talking about it. And there's all sorts of range of concerns too, because of like, the other thing that's unique to an esports player association, and it's not just something that we have in Overwatch either, right? League of Legends has a player association, but it's backed by Riot, which obviously is not necessarily the same.
Tiny
You
conflict of
also
interest.
have a Counter-Strike player association, I believe.
Yes.
But it's very jointed and fragmented and things like that, because esports is all around the world, and it still doesn't deal with the unique question of, unlike soccer or football, or also football if you're a European, I guess football, and then or baseball, the developers own their game and they own
Yes.
the intellectual property to that. And while no one owns the intellectual property of being able to kick a ball with your foot, but so if you're banned from one league, you can go play another league, you can go play a different game. But if you're banned from Overwatch or CS:GO or League of Legends, there is no recourse to that. It's like how the iBuyPower players were banned by Valve for the matchmaking thing, and they're just done. Can never play CS:GO again, essentially. Like, they can play in some minor things in some alternate tournaments and leagues, but their career was essentially over in terms of like where they could go.
And really, that is one of the major differences between esports and traditional sports. It's actually one of the reasons that the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, did not allow esports to be included in the Olympics. Instead, you had Intel being like the Esport World Games, which was going to be happening kind of the month before the Olympics opened in Japan. Both of those events, of course, now being postponed. But this is kind of like a very large ecosystem problem overall, and I think that this is going to be one of the major real sticking points before esports actually does make it to the size of traditional sports. Until we have something like a AAA open source esports, which isn't actually commercially owned and controlled through a TOS or a EULA, these problems are going to exist. Even if you do have a players association, unless it's actually backed by a group that has a vested interest or some sort of, you need to have some sort of actual negotiating power in order to get these sort of things done. You have a players association negotiating on behalf of any of these problems that you've brought up. What is the downside of the company just straight up ignoring you or the players association? And right now, even if the association does exist, other than kind of like a PR hit, if you did something ridiculous like charging Lastro $10,000 fine or literally banning him from Overwatch, like if you do pants on head sort of decisions like that, obviously you're going to take a PR hit. But outside of like basic PR repercussions, there's really nothing that you can do to these developers who do have legal ownership over the game. Like the pixels that you're using to move around and do, like, they exist proprietary on Blizzard and Activision servers. There's nothing you can do about that. And that's not something unique to Blizzard Activision. It's unique to pretty much every single major esport. And again, like, unless we get to the point where you have a AAA video game that's developed in the same style as like a Linux operating system is, these things are going to remain endemic to the scene.
And I think also that's probably where we want to ask the viewers about what your thoughts about fines, about chat fines, about fines in general, the Overwatch League. Is this a problem? Is it something that can even be solved? Are players ever going to be able to deal with the fact that they're multi-nationalities, multilingual, spread across the world, and they don't, also they don't even technically own the game by any means, to where a player association could solve these issues? Or is it something that's too far outside the scope of like dealing with anything in relation to esports or Overwatch League right now? And sort of let us know, like, what is the fairness? Is a fine fair for Lastro and Rascal in association to that? Should they step back and maybe renounce those fines? Like, how are you guys feeling about the fairness of that decision, and where maybe an esports player association might fit into that, and exactly if it would ever fit into that? But moving on there.
The one thing, I actually watched the Chinese games through the replay viewer, so I didn't actually watch them on the live broadcast. But was there any match chat or smack talking happening in Chinese between the teams?
I mean, nothing that I saw, at least. I mean, obviously these are time zones that are generating within, because, like, frankly, we both have to do prep for the show and do our own things, and like, we also, both myself and also yourself, at times run companion streams to the games on top of that happen later in the day. So I'm just not getting up that early, okay? That doesn't mean other people shouldn't be up to go watch them. They're very exciting games. They were very exciting games this weekend too, which we'll talk about, but I just can't do it. But speaking of the games this weekend, and on that topic, Shanghai has finally appeared. It looks like, at least, that we have broken the circle of suck. The chains have been broken, the suck chains, and Shanghai are sort of back to that spot of looking to be the best team currently within China. Of all the Chinese-based teams. Who knows from the total region as it develops, because we had all those teams go back, like New York and Vancouver and Seoul, that are probably going to play against them soon. But Shanghai is looking back on top after losing the previous weekend.
Yeah, and I must admit that my prediction was wrong. This week we were seeing the rematch between the Chengdu Hunters and the Shanghai Dragons, and I honestly thought that the Chengdu Hunters had the advantage over the Shanghai Dragons. Now, the Chengdu Hunters played twice. They played against the Guangzhou Charge on Saturday, and then they played against the Shanghai Dragons on Sunday. And I was really, really hoping to see more of Ameng's Winston because we did have the ball. Wrecking Ball was banned, which was, of course, going to be Ameng's strength. And I thought that even with that ball being banned, with Ameng being able to play the Winston and them having Jinmu, Jinmu was just on fire the entire weekend. That man is an absolute monster, having really great successes on the Pharah. But against the Charge, Ameng did not look good. Really feeding quite a lot. I'm not sure if he was not realizing that Winston doesn't actually have 1200 health alongside what Wrecking Ball does, but especially on the Ilios map against the Guangzhou Charge, Ameng was just feeding his brains out. So once it actually came to the match against the Shanghai Dragons, I was going to say the Ameng, but no, the Chengdu Hunters definitely seemed to tone down the amount of kind of flanking and chaos that they did against the Guangzhou Charge, and instead they did a lot more of the Reinhardt and Zarya, and which was, it was okay. The way that they played it were okay. They were certainly outclassed by the Shanghai Dragons. Once we got into this Reinhardt Zarya matchup, the Shanghai Dragons were playing that triple angle where they had the Zarya off at a different angle, or playing much like the San Francisco Shock did last year, where they were on the high ground, still doing the bubbles, being actually able to help their DPS zone out those high grounds. When you take the Chengdu Hunters, rather, that had this really super chaotic style, super flanky, and you have a team where pretty much anybody on that team could be a superstar, but nobody's feeding resources into them because everybody's a superstar. It really does get to that point where it feels like when everybody's a superstar, nobody is. And the teamwork on the Chengdu Hunters, while not non-existent, is just not to the point that it needs to be for them to really be a top-tier team. And the Shanghai Dragons really absolutely brutalized the Chengdu Hunters anytime they tried to play anywhere close to kind of reasonable Overwatch. Anytime they tried to mirror, anytime they tried to play a little bit safe with those double shields, beyond that kind of Route 66 second point hold, they didn't really see much success on it. When they did play the Winston back on Volskaya Industries, Ameng looked fantastic. They got that great work done with Jinmu again on the Pharah first and second point. And they won Volskaya Industries because of that. But for the vast majority of time, they either matched, they played the double shield, they tried to play safer, smarter, cleaner Overwatch, and it's just not their play style.
It's weird how Chengdu has remained the same team with different coaching staff and some new players even from last year to this year. It's like they just can't play normal Overwatch. It's just not possible. Which isn't inherently bad because you see some incredible things happening, but it's so weird because it's they do just insane micro plays, like Yveltal and Jinmu doing crazy res tech and crazy fair mercy play, and all this interesting dives that they do in flanks. And on an individual level, you're looking at all this wow, this is so cool. And then you try to put it together, and it's just a jumbled up mess of a team that just can't compete.
This is not a team where you could take a player like Yveltal out of the roster and put in a different mercy main and have that teamwork. It's not a team where you could take Jinmu out of the roster, put a different flex player in and still have to work. They're working around each one of these playstyles. And honestly, Yveltal's playstyle is both weekends has seriously impressed me. But when you look at the shit that they do, on the Rialto map against oh goodness, it was the Charge on Rialto. They held them 3-0, right? And their playstyle, they had Bacon Jack in. So it was Bacon Jack and Jinmu. Bacon Jack was on the Widowmaker, and then you had Jinmu on the Pharah. And really what happened was that they basically put Ameng on the Orisa and had him sacrificial, where they would have him on the front line, the DPS would do as much as they can, Ameng would die, and then after Ameng died, the Pharah and the D.Va would kind of dive the backline on the Ana, forcing the peel, so that Yveltal could get the res on Ameng, and then everybody kind of just resets. So they would do these weird backline dives just to get Ameng back up.
And it's it's actually a perfectly valid thing, right? Because it's you dive and you force the cooldowns, and you come back in, and it's so that you can't stop the res a lot of times, but your cooldowns up.
They didn't stop the res pretty much ever.
Incredible micro plays, but then it doesn't translate at all to teams like Shanghai or when certain heroes are gone. And so I think we can be in agreement that Shanghai especially based off the hype we heard initially and watching them, is that they are looking to be the best team in China. We'll see how they develop within the entire region, right? Once they start playing
Oh
more of
yeah.
those teams in Korea. And then on the same vein is that Spark also won their game against Charge and are looking to get on the up and up. But I say this and I swear we're gonna get boomed because I'm like, Shanghai and Spark, they're looking good again. And then it's gonna happen. Chengdu are gonna come back and they're gonna do some weird crap and it's gonna be incredible, and then they're gonna win, and then like we're just like, well, I don't know. Like I don't even know where to stay there. And so which once again lends like credence to the theory of that the league has had a lot more parity now than it has before,
Yeah.
and hero pools has further increased that because of the sort of the chaos and the flexibility needed for that. But it just is a nightmare
Oh
to
yeah.
accurately predict at times or
And,
put any sort of semblance of predictions.
and this was kind of the point that I was getting to. Like we were taking the long route. We were taking a detour to make this point. You know, you asked me about Shanghai Dragons. I went on this massive rant about the Chengdu Hunters. But the Chengdu Hunters, they seem like a team where if they can pull you down to their level, they are just going to feed you haymakers back and forth. But the Shanghai Dragons, there's not nearly as much to say about them because they're not nearly as interesting of a team. You know, you have Lip and Leave, who are wow, that's wrong.
They have Lip and Diem and Lip and
Fleta.
Fleta. Lip and Fleta is who they've been playing
I
mostly.
was
Is
like,
Lip and Fleta.
brain, no, that was wrong. Yeah, Lip and Fleta, like fantastic. They popped off. But you know, they play clean, and it definitely seems like the strategy that the Shanghai Dragons. You know, we were talking about this when we were talking about the Fuels approach to kind of having this main core and just trying to support Decay and Doha from popping off. The Shanghai Dragons approach is kind of like pick one composition, learn it well, learn all the different ways that you can kind of maneuver with it, attack with it. But you know, they got this the Lucio Moira and the Sombra Reaper, and they just played that. They played it well. They very rarely swapped, other than the extra time desperation hold for Volskaya second rounds. But you know, they're clean. They play good Overwatch. They've got very capable DPS players, and yeah, unless you can like really catch them off guard or find a crack in their armor, like they definitely seem like a very, very large separator between the teams that are kind of just making it as they go, playing a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more improvised or adaptive when they are kind of banking on these hero pools. And the Shanghai Dragons look like they're finding one answer that's kind of a conservative answer, but good enough and can still allow the team to be strong and confident on it. And if you're trying to like, you know, outsmart them or outplay them, they seem a very, very good team, strong fundamentals, good basics, and I think they're going to be hard to beat by teams in the lower half of the ladder because they're just not really going to show weakness. You know, they're going to go pretty even with higher tier teams, but against lower tier teams, I feel like it's just going to be blowouts for the rest of the season.
I think also we have to then tie that into now and sort of that style that you talked about, how Shanghai is looking to perfect the singular comp, and it's mostly been around the same style of comps that we've seen throughout the entire season so far, which is, you know, whether it be Double Shield or the Ryan Zarya or the Ryan Diva, you know, it's the same death ball centric style. If you play around a Mei or you play around a Reaper, and you're just, I mean, and also since Mei hasn't been banned that often, it's definitely almost always been a Mei. Is that the tanks can't live, and that's the death ball sort of centric style. And there's not really much dive other than Chengdu at times. And Shanghai Lip himself predicted that the comp, because the bans for Overwatch League for this upcoming weekend, you have Reaper, Sombra, Diva, and Ana banned. And so you look at that and you're like, pretty interesting bans overall, except for the fact that Ana wasn't even played last weekend at all because you can only play Moira because there's Doom in play. There's you had the ability to play, you know, the Reaper on top of that, and you could just walk over people. And so the Moira was easily crunchable pretty much. But now you've lost that chance to play on at all. And in addition, they removed Diva and Reaper, which are two of the most important heroes to like enable Death Ball in a lot of ways, or at least at its current form. But Mei and Doomfist and McCree now, because also we saw plenty of McCree, are still there.
I mean, the chances of this going back to the Mei McCree, and I think this was actually one of the, like, Arrow was the first one to point out to me that this was very likely to happen, especially when you get these hero bans that are based on percentage playtime. It's very, very likely that in the Overwatch League that you're going to get to this point where it kind of fluctuates between two different compositions. You know, if you have one composition that is based off of, you know, the 3 or 4 best heroes in that composition, those get banned. And then the next week, it's kind of like this has been decided that this is the kind of main composition. Do we get to the point where we're fluctuating constantly between Sombra Reaper and Mei McCree sort of thing? Like there's very little doubt next week that we're going to see some teams going right back to what they're comfortable with or building on that. Maybe some minor tank adjustments, but very likely that double shield Mei McCree is going to come right back. Baptiste is in play if they want to do that. Moira is still in play. Lucio is still in play. All the components are still there. So are we going to get to the point where these teams are going to have basically two compositions that they, with minor tweaks each week, prepare for, and then just kind of swap back and forth and back and forth?
Forever. Forever. The Ouroboros, just the snake eating itself.
Yeah, we're just going to have two simultaneous metas. We're not going to be locked into goats. It would be as if we had a period of time where we were simultaneously like Schrodinger's meta in both dive and goats meta at the same time. So, and then we're going to have prediction shows where it's like, oh, this week, we're playing goats, or this week we're playing dive, and this team's better. So it's,
it's just like a light switch, on, off, on, off. But the thing is that it's a light switch that achieves the same result. It feels like it's just a light switch that goes on to just about the same amount of on, or like a dimmer, because the style of play hasn't changed no matter the bans, realistically. Not very much.
Not really.
Because we shift between, this past week. It's like, wow, we have Torb. Oh, but what's that? We're still playing Lucio, Moira, Ryan Diva, or sometimes Ryan Zarya, and then you have like a Mei, or you have a Reaper or something like that, and you're just deathballing and looking to run over some tanks, and your backline's looking to survive, right? Mm-hmm. And then that goes back even when we had McCree. It's Mei McCree, but it's the same thing. It's like getting no tank value. The tanks are just trying to live. And sure, now you can play Ana, right? Because there isn't really that worry about a Doomfist hitting you into the backline. And you have a Diva, so you don't have to worry about, or a Mei, so you don't have to worry about a Diva zoning your Ana as much. But it's still the same composition, except you've replaced the Reaper with a McCree, because the McCree can counter the Reaper a little bit more and the Mei a little bit more. So it's just like a back and forth style of play forever, no matter the comp, because it's all built around, I feel, the same DPS core, which is the Mei, the Reaper, now the Doom, and then the McCree, or even the Hanzo points. Like it's the same style over and over and over again, no matter the bans.
And then the Fuel's gonna play Tracer.
Yeah, and then the Fuel's gonna play Tracer, which is like but it's still gonna be Tracer with like Doom or Reaper, right? And you rush them down with a Ryan Zarya or a Ryan Diva. Yeah. So it's like slight variations, obviously. Like it's not like it's the same comps. It's like we are seeing different styles and different versions, but the end result and the end point of thinking is about the same. Probably the newest style of play that we have seen now this entire season so far has been like the hard parket Doom strategy, where instead of just everyone in a front line moving forward with like a Reaper and a Mei, right, and like you make sure to survive, is that you have the Brigida and you have the Zarya just pocket the Doom really hard, it goes to the back, and then you move forward.
And that strategy became a lot more powerful with the updates to Brigida, but that strategy might be new to the Overwatch League, but it was actually extremely popular in China, especially Chinese contenders. It was something that they always did. They had the Doomfist Zarya combination originally, and then they also once they came down to the double tanks, there was actually a lot of Doomfist Genji dive, which was pretty cool to see. But yeah, so it's new to the Overwatch League. It's been very popular in China, and then the Los Angeles Gladiators played that style as well. I forget against which team. I think it was the San Francisco Shock that they actually picked it out against. But yeah, we're seeing some of those new styles. They are kind of minor differences, and we are seeing kind of the core pieces that really matter, which characters are kind of filling a role, which one can be replaced, and there's the point where
is there a solution to this? Like, is there should we be changing up the ban system, or should we just be tweaking the heroes to make sure that they're not must runs when the weeks they're unbanned?
I think that you definitely have to get to the point where you're actually balancing the heroes much more rapidly. And I think that a lot of this does come down to the number of barrier heroes that we have. Between Sigma, Reinhardt, and Orisa, barriers are always going to have, you're never going to get to the point where you ban 3 barriers. If you ban 2 of them, sure, but that's not going to, it's less likely that's going to actually show up in a dynamic system where it's like week A, week B, week A, week B sort of thing. So I definitely think that probably balancing the tanks is the thing that will most likely break us out of this, because if we have, right now the DPS core is definitely the one that is the most fundamental to which meta is being played. A lot of the support picks are based off of what can you do as a support in order to stay alive? How kind of greedy can you be while staying alive? And then even the tanks, the tanks are very much at this point kind of like how long can you live? There's Less so recently, how much space can you make, and more, it's kind of like how long can you live? How long can you just be a presence that's soaking resources? So if you do get to the point where you're having the supports and the tanks be less more about kind of survival, like this constant horror show of run around, run away, don't feed, don't die sort of thing, and get them more into the point where they are having to be more active, where you are, even if you bring things like Roadhog back, as long as you're not bringing Roadhog back specifically because of the pull halt combo. Like if you have if you balance in such a way that you're giving supports and tank players more agency over teamfight wins, then you're going to get things where the balancing is going to make too many combinations for it to just cycle between two different metas.
Nah, and then also, once again, the hero bans and ranked are divergent than the hero pools in Overwatch League, because as in opposition, and then on the other side of the rank side is that we have Mercy, Hanzo, and Ball banned.
Yeah.
So which is a very different set of bans, because now there's only three bans.
Yeah.
Three bans, and there's one in each category. And so there's not only less bans, but there's less bans than there really have been before in the rank side either. And it's just, once again, we see that what they're doing, because they have made experimental changes, and they've gone live, I think, pretty fast as well, and they've sort of followed the card of the bands, right? And how, like, as the bands come out, experimental will put out some changes from some bands that have happened, adjusting like Doomfist and Sombra and things like that. So we might be seeing, and Ash, and so we might be seeing some adjustments as well to those heroes, but it's more of a question of, will there be enough to really counteract this sort of death ball centric meta that we've been seeing a lot in Overwatch League, or is that more of just, we need nerfs and adjustments versus the buffs of these other heroes? Is really what it begs into question, because it's feels like a revolving door that's hitting me in the face right now. Is what it feels like.
Yeah. And there are only 2 more days until we find this out. Hopefully by Thursday's show, we will have a new set of hero bands full rank, so we can talk about those and see what the next step in Team 4 and Jeff Kaplan's bag is. They have been changing things up a lot. We have a few data points. We have our, we have our suspicions about what their plans are and kind of what these bans are entailing, but we won't know for sure until really after this week. We've seen some pretty aggressive changes based off of what seemed to be the experimental bans last week, but this week maybe we finally get a few more dots and get a draw that.
Maybe we get one hero banned and ranked for next week. Maybe there's
just
0 heroes.
One.
Maybe every hero is banned and next week. Good luck.
Just ban the popular heroes and watch the forums melt down. Just ban Mercy and Diva. Yeah.
Well, Mercy technically is banned right now, and people were upset.
They'd lose their shit if it was banned 2 weeks in a row.
That's true. That would be an overall just a mess. So just working to reconcile, and we'll see what happens for it. But it does give me some hope when I see the trajectory of, like, sure, the hero pools are different, but we've talked in previous episodes how, and viewers have said, like, sometimes we might need differences in the rank bands and the Overwatch League bands, because the systems aren't the same, right? Especially different elos. And we're seeing there a trajectory of heroes that get touched during the ranked meta go to the experimental cards, and the experimental cards come to live pretty quickly. So I think that there is, like, an actually pretty decent pipeline that is being established, especially as we move into Overwatch 2. So not all hope is lost. It just feels right now we're getting hit with a very similar meta style, but it's still not GOATs. So some people are rejoicing over that. And I think we've hit all of our mailbag as well, because we already made fun of our viewers that made the wrong predictions.
Yep.
Which is the most important part of it.
Imagine having wrong picks. That's
I've never been wrong about anything ever.
I've never been wrong either.
Not a single time.
What's our mailbag question for this week? What are we asking our viewers in their infinite wisdom to educate us on?
We did ask them earlier over what was the right call over the fines, and I think we'll just rate that now. I think that'll be our question again that we'll double down on is, were the fines a rascal and Last Road necessary? Were they right? Does there need to be some sort of player association there? Is there a conflict of interest? Like, what are your thoughts? Too harsh? Too little? Needs more? Needs less? Let us know.
Let us know what you think about the match chat as well. Whether you want to see more of that, whether you think that it's too unprofessional and too much of a risk for sponsors. So let us know that as well. But that is all the time we have for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, whether you're watching us on Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter. And if you're watching this, or rather listening to this, as it's pre-recorded on your favorite podcast platform like Spotify, then I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and we will see you next week. I'm Jayne, this is Avast, and this has been Contested. Have a great day.